This is Chapter 7, The Final Test, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. Ellie Anderson's alarm clock blinked insistently, but it never had a chance to wake her. Sleep had barely touched her the night before. Today was the culmination of a lifetime. 50 years of relentless effort had led to this moment, the final test that would determine whether humanity truly had a future among the stars. If it succeeded, humanity would no longer be tethered to an unwelcoming Earth, forever at the mercy of the artificial intelligence that had claimed it. If it failed, well, failure was not an option. She exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar weight of history pressing against her. With a light push of her hands against the bed, she lifted herself effortlessly into a standing position, her body moving with the graceful ease of someone who had spent nearly 4 decades adapting to the moon's reduced gravity. At 70 years old, Ellie was grateful for the reprieve it offered. Her joints, ravaged by progressive degenerative arthritis, would have made even the simplest movements excruciating under Earth's crushing pull. Here she still had freedom. Here she could still work. She glanced at the far wall of her quarters, where a screen displayed a live feed of Earth. It was always on, always there. The planet floated into the abyss like a silent specter, veiled in its ever-shifting tapestry of blue and white, beautiful, untouchable, a constant reminder of what had been lost. Ellie had watched the image every day of her life, not just for comfort, but for resolve. It reminded her of why they had fought, why they had built, why they had endured. Every hardship, every sacrifice had led them here. People like her parents had paved the way, giving everything to ensure that humanity would not vanish into the void of extinction. And now it was her turn to finish what they had started. With one last deep breath, Ellie turned away from the image of Earth and stepped forward. Today, history would be written. Ellie stepped into the shower, allowing the fine mist of water to cleanse her in a system so efficient it barely used more than a glassful. The warm droplets evaporated almost as quickly as they touched her skin, collected and purified in an endless cycle of reuse. As she lathered up, she couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. Something as simple as water, an element so abundant on Earth, yet so precious here, had become a testament to humanity's relentless ingenuity. The optimization of water management was just one piece of the grand puzzle that would ensure mankind's survival. For decades, teams of engineers and scientists had worked tirelessly to perfect a closed-loop recycling system. Every drop was recovered, every molecule accounted for. And just recently, they had reached what had once seemed like an impossible goal, 100% efficiency. Not a single particle of water was wasted. With this breakthrough, the Earth's natural reserves, once a critical lifeline, were no longer needed for daily survival. Instead, they were now preserved for a greater purpose, fueling the generational ships. The vast reservoirs of lunar ice, painstakingly extracted and stored, would sustain the starships on their journey across the cosmos. The success of this system was more than just a milestone. It was a declaration that humanity was ready to take the next step into the stars. Water wasn't the only challenge they had conquered. It was astonishing what humanity could accomplish when their very existence was on the line. Time and time again, they had proven that no obstacle was truly insurmountable. Matter itself had been optimized to an almost perfect cycle. The hydroponic farms, the backbone of food and oxygen production, had once faced a daunting problem. They required a steady supply of essential nutrients: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. These nutrients were indispensable, but early projections showed that carrying enough reserves to sustain a multi-century voyage would be logistically impossible. For years, the looming question had threatened to derail their efforts. But then came the breakthrough. By refining and optimizing waste recycling, they had dramatically reduced their reliance on stored nutrients. What had once required vast reserves could now be sustained almost indefinitely. The newest advancements in biological recycling meant that a generational starship could theoretically operate for over 1,000 years without resupply. What once seemed unthinkable was now a reality. Humanity wasn't just surviving. They were mastering the art of self-sufficiency in the most hostile environment imaginable. Yet for all the scientific triumphs, one of the greatest challenges remained untouched by engineering alone: the human mind. The prospect of spending entire lifetimes in deep space, confined to the walls of a starship, was a psychological burden unlike any in history. The toll of isolation, the endless void stretching in every direction, could fracture even the strongest spirits. The scientists and engineers knew this. They had designed countermeasures, not just functional, but beautiful. Projection panels would line the interiors of the starships, simulating the shifting skies of Earth. Through them, the crew could experience the cycle of seasons, the crisp gold of autumn, the tranquil blues of winter, the brilliant greens of spring. The lighting systems were carefully calibrated to mimic the natural wavelengths of sunlight, ensuring that humans received the necessary exposure to maintain vitamin D levels and circadian rhythms. Even the temperature inside the habitats was engineered to recreate the familiar ebb and flow of terrestrial seasons, a crisp 10 degrees Celsius in winter, a comfortable 24 degrees Celsius in summer, just enough to subtly remind the crew of the world they had left behind. These weren't just luxuries, they were survival mechanisms. The key to preserving humanity wasn't just in sustaining their bodies, but ensuring that their minds, their spirits, and their very sense of being human remained intact. Evolution had shaped humanity over millions of years to thrive in a very specific world. To truly escape the great filter that threatened humanity with extinction, they had to bring a piece of that world with them, no matter how far they traveled. Yet, for all their breakthroughs in science and engineering, the greatest challenge remained: human nature itself. Mankind was not made for stagnation. Humanity was a species driven by curiosity, ambition, and an insatiable need for challenge. It was not in their nature to exist in stillness. Throughout history, civilizations had thrived by overcoming adversity, by pushing against hardship, by breaking barriers that seemed insurmountable. The scientists designing the generational ships understood this truth intimately. If humanity was to survive, not just biologically, but psychologically, culturally, and spiritually, they had to find a way to manufacture that struggle. And so, they made a controversial decision. The societies aboard the generational starships would not be built upon utopian ideals of equality or stability. Instead, they would be designed to mimic the cycles of human history: class struggle, revolution, renewal. A system that ensured people would always have something to fight for. The hierarchy was intentional. Social classes would be rigidly defined, enforced by physical separation. The elite would reside in exclusive, luxurious districts, while the working class would be confined to more austere quarters. Their roles would be distinct, their movements restricted to different sectors of the ship, ensuring that tension between the two groups would grow over time. That tension was by design, because when power became too concentrated, when the privileged few abused their status too severely, revolution would be inevitable. But what the revolutionaries would never know, what no one but a select few would ever realize, was that their rebellion had been planned centuries in advance. To ensure these controlled revolutions unfolded as intended, certain mechanisms were quietly embedded into the social fabric of the ships. A private, untraceable communication network would allow the oppressed to organize and resist. The illusion of secrecy would empower them, giving them the courage to rise against injustice. At key points, deliberate shortages of food and resources, carefully engineered fluctuations in hydroponic yields, would create moments of hardship. Not enough to threaten survival, but enough to push resentment over the edge. The cycle would play out predictably. A rigid capitalist system would give way to revolution, which in turn would lead to a more egalitarian society, until the slow creep of power and privilege once again began to distort the balance. And so the pendulum would swing, back and forth, generation after generation. Without struggle, without hardship, without something to fight against, humanity was at risk for stagnation. The scientists feared that, left in comfort and security for too long, the settlers would lose their sense of purpose. They would grow complacent, apathetic, and in that apathy, the entire mission would collapse. It was a monumental, almost terrible responsibility to design such a system. Only 5 people aboard each ship would ever know the truth. 5 individuals chosen in secret, entrusted with the burden of overseeing these cycles of controlled destruction and rebirth. They would be carefully selected by their predecessors, chosen for their intelligence, their emotional fortitude, and their unwavering belief in the necessity of this experiment. The true test of leadership was not merely governance, it was the ability to balance control and chaos without ever letting either fully consume the other. No rebellion could be allowed to spiral into total collapse. No regime could be permitted to suppress dissent indefinitely. The cycles had to be maintained. Despite the social division within each ship, the generational fleet as a whole would remain instantly connected through quantum communications. This would foster a sense of belonging to a larger community, alleviating the feelings of confinement and internal tensions that would have to endure for centuries. If Ellie's propulsion test succeeded today, it would mean the generational ships could travel at 99% the speed of light. This breakthrough would introduce a profound change that could alleviate the social anxiety of confinement, time dilation. For every 7 years experienced by those who remained stationary, only 1 year would pass for those traveling at near light speed. The voyage to distant stars would not last millennia for those inside the spaceships, but merely hundreds of years, thanks to time dilation. This would alleviate the anxiety of confinement within society and reduce the need to carry as many resources to complete their journey. Since time dilation would be consistent across each generational ship, communication between them would be possible within the same relative time frame. They would not be isolated in the vast emptiness of space. The ships themselves would be connected through instant communication. Over the centuries of their journey, they would share history, progress, and knowledge, ensuring that no colony was truly alone. A network of minds, spanning the stars. This connection would preserve more than just scientific discoveries. It would safeguard culture, language, and identity across the fleet. A shared history would bind them, allowing them to advance as a collective civilization, even as their ships drifted across the void, light years apart. But there was a risk. The same system that allowed them to share knowledge and innovation could also spread instability. Revolutions, ideologies, conflicts, once contained within a single society, now had the potential to propagate across the entire fleet. For the first time in history, mankind would attempt to sustain a civilization that spanned multiple centuries, across ships that would never physically meet. Would this connection strengthen the human race, or would it become a new kind of vulnerability, one they had yet to understand? The scientists had done everything they could to anticipate the future, but there were forces beyond calculation, beyond control, and in the end, it would not be up to them. It would be up to humanity itself. Ellie stepped out of the shower, her thoughts heavy with the weight of history. The road to this moment had been long, arduous, a desperate race against extinction. Every breakthrough, every sacrifice had brought them closer, but one final piece remained, one final test, and Ellie held the key. If today's experiment confirmed what she had worked for her entire life, then humanity would have a real chance, not just to survive, but to escape, to thrive, to break free from the solar system and chart a new destiny among the stars. She moved to her locker and retrieved her special work suit. Not the standard one she wore every day. This one was different. It was a pale red, adorned with elegant, abstract wireframe patterns, a tribute to the ever-evolving resilience of humankind. She had worn it only on the most significant days of her life, and today, more than ever, it felt right. The suits themselves were a marvel of human ingenuity, another product of the relentless innovation that had defined their existence over the past few decades. Designed to regulate body temperature without the need for a power source, they allowed humans to adapt seamlessly to extreme environments. The first iterations had been dull, featureless, utilitarian, pale gray, uninspired. But humanity was more than just survival. People quickly realized that to endure the great unknown, they needed more than efficiency. They needed identity. They needed beauty. And so, creativity exploded. The sterile gray suits became canvases for personal expression. Colors, patterns, and intricate designs flourished, transforming each suit into a reflection of the wearer's spirit. It was a small thing, but in the future, where every single detail mattered, even joy, even individuality, became vital for survival. Ellie turned toward the far wall, where the ever-present video feed of Earth played on the screen. The planet still looked as it always had, blue, breathtaking, oblivious to the battle for its legacy. She had spent her entire life watching it from a distance. and if today's test succeeded, she would have to start preparing for the hardest part of all, saying goodbye. That was Chapter 7, The Final Test, from a story called The Time-Dilated Generations, by Esteban Gallardo. Thank you so much for listening, and we hope to see you again next time.